Welcome to Betrayal Recovery Radio, the official podcast of APSATS, the Association of Partners of Sex Addict Trauma Specialists, hosted by Dr. Jake Porter. APSATS is a nonprofit organization providing professional training and compassionate support to partners affected by problematic sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. In each episode, Dr. Jake guides a conversation of enlightening insights and practical tools to empower those affected by sex addiction and betrayal trauma to use their voices and live their values. The mission of Betrayal Recovery Radio is to offer hope to those in need of healing and growth to those moving through grief. And now, here's your host, Dr. Jake Porter.
Well, hey there. Welcome to Betrayal Recovery Radio. Happy New Year to you all. I hope you had a great holiday season. Today, we're going to start the year off with a topic that is super important, but also pretty sensitive and can activate a lot of feelings. It can activate feelings both for betrayed partners and for those who've committed betrayal as it gets into the issue of consent. Today, I'm joined by APSATS board member Alana Gordon, and we talk about what consent really is, how it is expressed and shared, and also why it is so important, particularly after the discovery of chronic betrayal or sex addiction. As the owner and founder of Choose Recovery Services and a member of the board of directors of APSATS, Alana Gordon brings her extensive experience in helping individuals and couples heal from infidelity, sex addiction, and betrayal. Her professional roles include serving as a marriage and family therapist and a life coach. She's extensively trained in research-based treatment for betrayal and addiction. And she facilitates full disclosures and intensive sessions lasting 1, 3, or 5 days to support deep healing and progress. She works with older teens, adults, and is a therapist to therapist healing from betrayal. By collaborating with clients willing to engage actively in their recovery, Alana walks with them toward regaining balance, health, and happiness in their lives. I really enjoyed this conversation with Alana because she does such a great job of taking such a sensitive and what can be complicated subject and makes it very accessible, easy to understand, and applicable. And so I do hope that you get a lot out of this conversation. Before we turn our attention there, I do want to let you know of some things coming up here. One thing in particular, in fact, I want to just focus on this because I think it's really important, and that is the annual APSATS conference is coming up in about a month from the time this podcast is airing. That's February 5th through the 7th, 2025. The theme of the conference this year is Healing Together, Empowering Partners and the Professionals Who Guide Them. This 3-day conference is via Zoom, so you can join us from anywhere in the world. It will be filled with some of the field's leading experts in betrayal healing, and there's stuff for everyone, stuff for those going through their own healing. There's stuff for professionals, for clinicians, for coaches, clergy interested in learning more about this. It's just a great way to get more information on the reality of betrayal trauma and how folks heal from it. So if you want to learn more about APSATS' upcoming conference, you can go to apsats.org. That is apsats.org, and find out more about it there. Betrayal Recovery Radio is the official APSATS podcast. And so APSATS does want to give you a free gift. If you've not claimed it yet, you can go to apsats.org/podcast to get a free download from Dr. Crystal Hollenbeck called Expectations. What should we expect? What should the betrayed expect from the betrayer in the therapeutic process? And so if you've not yet gotten that free gift from APSATS, just for being a listener to our podcast, go to apsats.org/podcast to claim that. Okay, I don't want to wait any longer to be able to turn our attention to this conversation with Alana Gordon. Well, hello, Alana. Welcome to Betrayal Recovery Radio. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad to have you on and excited to talk about this topic today. Really important. And I'm just going to literally dive right in here. We're talking about consent. What is consent and why are we talking about it?
Oh, well, I'll just admit first, this morning I woke up and I went, why did I choose this topic to bring today? And it's a really important topic. The reason I had hesitation is because it can be a really charged topic, especially through the lens of betrayal trauma and sexual addiction.
Yeah.
When we have had a relationship that has had sexual addiction happening, whether you knew about it or you didn't, there's a lot of patterns and foundational pieces that go into that really impact how we see sexuality, and
Mm-hmm.
and it shapes what to us may look or seem normal or healthy, and sometimes we have some really skewed ideas, and
Right.
consent is one of those things that is so foundational
Mm.
to a healthy relationship that I have learned that most of my couples, if we have sexual addiction as part of the equation in the couple, we have to go back to the very beginning and learn just some of what this healthy sexuality looks like. And consent at its core is part of that. So consent really is the ability for somebody to be able to choose into an experience without any manipulation, coercion, pressure, consequences for saying no.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, unfortunately, consent hasn't been something that's been an active part of that relationship.
Right. Right. And I understand the that feeling you woke up with this morning as I was reviewing some of the notes and emails we swapped ahead of time. I had a little bit of that too, because and if I'll get a little bit personal here as a man in recovery myself, when over the last few years more talk about consent has been happening in our field, and I think even in our culture more widely, it's been something named more frequently than it used to. I know, thinking through my own story, I've had to wrestle with some of my own past behaviors prior to recovery, and me thinking through, what does this mean, and the shame that comes up. What does this mean about me as a person? What
Yeah.
is it, and I just want to name that, and I want to name for any listeners who are maybe on the side of on that side of being the betraying partner, the feelings of shame that can come up, and the resistance maybe to some of these ideas because of the fear of what that would mean about me, what that would mean about a person who has perhaps not practiced consent in its healthiest and most robust forms.
And yes. And then I look at same thing, betrayed partners. When they all of a sudden start learning, they can have the shame of, why didn't I know this? Or shame of, I should have had boundaries with this. Or even just the, what does this say about me or about my relationship? It brings up a lot of questions. And so when I did this episode through a different lens, but on my own podcast, I gave a big trigger warning disclaimer of, as you're listening to this, notice what comes up. And if it right now feels like, of all the things I'm doing in my healing journey, I can't tackle this yet, I just say, that's okay. We can set this aside and you can pick this back up when you're ready. And if you are in a place of like, no, I really am ready to be educated on this, and it's hard, that's
Mm-hmm.
okay too. Just take that information, I'd say, back to your therapist and say, hey, I noticed these things came up for me. Can we process them? Because there will be layers in this to
Right.
process.
Right. Yes. Good. Good. Okay. So with all of those little, warnings and caveats of the way, uh, tell us, give me your definition. What is consent?
My definition of consent, it's, and I'm going to read this because I wrote it down because I wanted it to be
Yeah,
concise. So
absolutely.
it's a voluntary, informed, and mutual agreement between individuals to engage in a specific activity with the understanding that it can be withdrawn at any time.
Mm,
And that piece right there, the withdrawn at any time, is a
mm,
really important component. At
yeah,
any time, you can say, hold on, actually, I don't feel safe. Or
right,
hold on, I'm having a trauma response and a trigger. I
right.
need a moment, or I need a day, or I need whatever I need, withdrawn at any time. So, a couple of components that I put into consent is the
Mm-hmm,
voluntary agreement,
mm-hmm,
and not just a voluntary agreement, but an enthusiastic participation.
yeah,
Sometimes with consent, this opting in, unfortunately, because of some of the patterns in the relationship,
right.
I see common I'm doing it because I don't want them to be mad, or like, yes, I'm choosing to do it because I don't want the consequences later if I don't. I'm choosing to do it. So it's like, I'm choosing, yes, it's me, I'm choosing because I'm afraid if I don't, then
Right.
technically we don't have that enthusiastic participation. It's yes, you're choosing to do it, but that is through a lens of there is some kind of manipulation, coercion, or pressure with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that actually isn't a full consent.
Yeah. 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 And I'm just thinking through so many of the things I've heard from betrayed partners I've worked with, or, whether individually or in couple settings of, I fear that if I didn't, he would be mad. If I didn't, he'll act out again. If I don't, right. Just all of these fears. And it's really putting them in a position where, um, what I think of is the room for enthusiastic participation isn't even there,
Well,
right?
the quickest way to kill, and if we're talking in consent in a sexual relationship, the
Right,
quickest way to kill a sex drive is to put pressure on something. And
right.
we can do that for any area. The quickest way we're going to diminish that desire would be to add that pressure. And I say this knowing full well, as a betrayed partner myself, if I were hearing this, I would feel a little hopeless. Like, okay, but like, I don't know what else to do.
Mm,
We've been in that pattern for so long. How do you not do that? Which we'll talk more about, but just noticing these areas where consent includes that maybe it's an area that we have some disruption in. So the voluntary agreement, the enthusiastic participation, the clear communication.
mm,
Consent actually requires an open and honest dialogue. And with a lot of my couples, they don't know how to talk about having any of these interactions before, during, or after.
right, right.
And so even this idea of talking about it sometimes is like, how do I even begin this? So even
Yeah,
like as we're talking, my brain's like, I can already see all the ways people's brains might be going like, oh no, there's so much here I have to do. And if there is, that's really exciting because that means there's so much here you get to do and how much better it can get.
way to reframe. Yeah, and I want to kind of put an exclamation point on something you said there. I don't want to normalize it in the sense that this is where we want people to be. I want to normalize in the sense that so many couples struggle with being comfortable talking about sex,
Yeah.
about their sexuality. And I don't mean this in a shaming way at all, but so many folks are kind of stuck, especially addicts, and even recovering addicts can be sort of stuck in an adolescent state in their sexuality where there's a bit of a regression from that functional adult grown up state backwards. And just practicing what you said, being clear, talk about it, have a conversation ahead of time, have a conversation during, you know,
Mhm.
um, yeah, that is so uncomfortable, but all growth requires discomfort, right?
Exactly. All growth requires discomfort. And I'm glad you brought up that adolescent state, because that piece can actually be really confusing, where I can
Mhm.
look at individuals and they go, I am successful in this area and this area and
Yeah.
all these areas of my life. But in this area, either I can't get the control I want, or my relationship is not in the place it wants. And they can feel really confused with, how can I be so successful in these areas and feel so unsuccessful here? And I
Mm.
think when we actually can slow down and admit to ourselves of like, oh, I actually am stuck here. I'm not able to have these conversations. I'm not able to comfortably express myself and be vulnerable in those ways. Then we're dealing with what's reality. And with reality, we can actually start to build and do that work,
Right. Yes.
which we'll come to this in just a minute. But so much of teaching consent with my couples, and I have to frame this in a way of, I'm not saying your children, but all of us have to go back and learn consent from the beginning. So we teach the skills that I start with what we teach 3 to 5 year olds and up from there, because a lot of us never got those lessons
Right.
ever on consent. So
Right.
we have to start at the foundation, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. A lot of listeners know, before I did this work professionally, I was a pastor. And I can remember when I got into recovery and I was growing and learning and wrestling through some of this stuff. I remember really clearly noticing this sort of pattern of behavior that was, I mean, I grew up in the South, we're just big family, all of this, and I remember, like, on the way out of church on Sundays, the parents telling their little kids, go give Pastor Jake a hug.
Yep.
Right. And kids, if they wanted to, that's fine. But I remember sometimes if they shied away or they hesitated, the parents saying, come on now, no, you be sweet, you go do right. And I actually started saying, hey, why don't we teach her that they get to decide who and when they hug another person. And it was kind of shocking, but it also made sense, I think, to a lot of people. So yeah, I mean, it starts so early
Mhm.
culturally and
Mhm.
socially for a lot of us, that we're almost like the message there isn't just not pro consent, but like anti consent. Like, you're being rude, you're being disrespectful if you don't do this thing that you may not want to do.
Yeah.
Kind of
Well,
makes me
and
feel
the
icky.
messages that
Yeah.
sends that we don't even realize, because I got those same messages as a child. I taught my kids until I learned better, where I would do like, yeah, go give grandma a hug. And sometimes my kids didn't want to. And it was like, no, don't be mean. So the messages that I was giving is, override your body to make sure somebody else feels good.
Right.
And now I can go, oh, no, 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 no. You get to honor your body, and they get to deal with their own emotions. And so if you feel safe enough and want to give grandma a hug, that's wonderful. Or give pastor a hug or whoever a hug, great. And if that doesn't feel right to you, that's great. You get to honor your
Mhm.
body. And that concept was so foreign to me the first time I learned
Mhm.
it.
Oh, oh, absolutely. Me too. Me too. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I could go on and on about those messages. Okay, but I want to stay on track because you had a great list going for us. You've talked about voluntary agreement, you talked about enthusiastic participation, clear communication. What else do you have for us?
Um, Informed understanding, which this one I want to explain a little bit. It's
Mm-hmm.
consent can only be meaningful if both parties fully understand what they're agreeing to.
Mm,
So this with betrayal trauma and sexual addiction is huge,
right.
because it includes being transparent about any relevant factors, intentions, health risks, other circumstances. So if there's hidden behaviors that are
Right.
happening, or there's hidden partners or other things like that, we don't have informed understanding. And so then we cannot have consent without having the full understanding of what's happening.
Mm.
And I don't know if you know this, Jake, but your video that you put on YouTube of the Stay on the Coaster, where you
Yeah.
talk about the power and difference and how when one person is hiding information, we have this power and difference. I have shared that with more clients. I want to say than you have. I don't know. But I've shared it with so many clients because it highlights such an important piece that when there's hidden information, we can't have consent. We don't have reality. We don't have the full picture. We don't have that informed understanding. And there is that huge power and difference. So we have to remove that, bring the transparency into light if we want to have consent.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And it requires, I just want to name the distorted thinking, the cognitive distortions that are often fighting against this one, which a lot of sex addicts think what consent here shouldn't involve something else I'm doing over there that doesn't involve you. But again, it may seem so obvious, but I want to name it because it's so important. No, the connection is the body being shared, your own body, the health risks there. And even if even if it's not a physical thing, the emotional boundaries, the expectations of the relationship, the agreements in the relationship of, you're my only person. I only share these kinds of things with you. I'm assuming that's all involved in what you're talking about here, not
Exactly.
just the physical um, implications.
Yeah. And honestly, I feel like even that right there, you could do a whole episode on.
Oh, sure.
And so, whatever that means for you as the listener, with what that informed understanding is, what information you need to know gets to
Yeah.
fall within that.
Right. Absolutely. Hey there, I wanted to pause for just a moment in our conversation here to make sure that you've claimed your free copy of my book. If you didn't know, this past season, I released my first book, Breaking Barriers, Building Bridges. It is right here. It's the couple-centered recovery model for lasting connection after betrayal. And I am giving this away for free at my website. If you are interested in learning what it means to actually heal together as a couple, to put the relationship at the center of your healing process, this is a great, simple, it is a short and accessible book to talk about what that means and how that happens. You can go to my website, drjakeporter.com/breaking barriers to claim your free copy today.
And the last two that I'll just say really quick is that you have the right to change your mind at any time. I love Vicky Tidwell Palmer's Bill of Rights. You can Google that.
Yeah.
And one of hers, I want to say like the first or second, is I have the right to change my mind. So
Yeah.
at any time with consent, you can say, I am consenting for right now, but then you have the right to say, hold on, even in the middle, or I was okay this time, but I'm not okay this time. And all of that is okay. All of that is part of consent, and all of that is part of a healthy sexual relationship.
Yes.
So you have
Yes.
permission to do that.
Yeah.
And then the last one is specificity. Glad I could say that word today. Consent only applies to the specific actions or boundaries agreed upon. It cannot be assumed for different activities or for the future. Each action requires new consent.
Mm, yeah. It's an ongoing dialogue, an ongoing conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a one and done, which truly is part of healthy sexuality.
Yeah.
And going back to the being able to have conversations and speak
Yeah.
about it, this becomes part of that regular conversation for both of you.
Yeah. 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 Healthy sexuality. The word that was coming to my mind is just intimacy.
Yeah.
That, learning to have hard conversations in an ongoing way, not like, okay, well, we did that. Phew, we never have to go back there again. But no, like this is the space actually where Well, let me put it this way. I think a lot of times people think, okay, this conversation you're saying we need to have in order to have consent, it's something in the way of then doing the work of healthy sexuality or doing the work of healing or doing the work. And okay, I'll do it so that I can then get to, the actual healing. No, that is the work. The thing that feels like an obstacle is the work. The thing that's hard. Yeah. Oh, man.
Well, and the more you do this, the more natural it becomes.
Right.
Where right now, having these conversations might feel like a 10 uncomfortability. And then it will move to an 8, to a 7, to a 6, to
Right.
a 5 until it's just part of what we talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. So let's shift a little bit. Let's say we've got couples listening or partners listening, individuals, whoever listening, and they're going, okay, I hear you. Something in me says, yeah, that's right. I know we need that. I need that. Where in the world do I start? How can we actually start building that kind of healthy foundation of consent?
Okay. Well, we already kind of talked about just at the very basic with little kids, you teach them that their body belongs to them and they have the right to say yes or no to any touch, period. And I'll just tell you, years ago, it's been a decade, I'm sitting in the therapist's office and the therapist asks me and my husband, they said, oh, I forget how he phrased the question, but something along the lines of, do you ever just slap her butt? And he's like, oh, yeah, of course. And he said, have you ever asked her permission to do that? And he laughs and he's like, no, of course not. And he's like, so is she just some farm animal that you can just like smack whenever you want? And I was like, he's like, I'm not calling you a cow, I promise.
Right, right.
But I remember at the time, like it blowing my mind that my husband would have to ask me or would ever ask me permission to touch me. And as I explored that, I realized that very deep down, I had this message that once I got married, my body belonged to him. And as I started to kind of pull back and look at that and look where that message came from and looked at like, do I agree with that and do I don't? It came back to this basic idea of I was never taught that my body was mine. As soon as I got married, my message was it belonged to him first and foremost so he could do whatever he wanted. And you look at that and you take in sex addiction and neither of us having that healthy foundation of skills, how destructive that could be over time. So these basic concepts where when I learned this, all of a sudden I had a bunch of little kids at the time and going, well, hold on. Does that mean I should ask my child, can I hug them before I hug them? That seems weird. And my therapist said, well, why don't you try? Like, let's just make it a science experiment. Why don't you try? And what was so interesting is like, it felt really awkward at first. My kids actually liked to be able to choose whether to hug or not. And guess what? Most of the time they were able to say yes. And we had like the biggest, wonderful hug. And there were times where sometimes they weren't ready for it. And them being able to say no and me respect that actually brought us closer. And then when they did want it, they'd usually like come up and snuggle up and say, okay, I want a hug now. I'm like, okay, great. Like such a foreign concept. So at its very basic, kids have the right to say yes or no. And you, as an adult, married or not, in a relationship or not, you do have the right to say yes or no to what happens to your own body.
As I'm listening to you talk through this, I'm thinking about a couple I work with in my online group coaching program for couples. And there's, I'll protect, identities here, but there's one particular couple who I've been working with and the partner who's the wife in the situation, the betrayed partner, she is really still feeling so unsafe. And her husband, who has done a lot of work in a lot of ways, is flabbergasted. But at just the most basic level, one of the boundaries she has set that he just cannot wrap his mind around is like, don't touch her. And even non-sexually, right?
Mhm.
Hug her, or expect hugs from her, expect hand holding, expect sitting close on the couch, and he's so struggling with understanding, well, she's my wife and we've done all this other stuff and I'm not doing that. But I'm thinking, as I'm listening to you, it makes so much sense. It's like, if you can't stop yourself from this very simple request, if you can't respect my request around this simple thing, how can I trust you with anything beyond that? Right? If I give you this, if you don't believe I'm autonomous enough to decide this thing, why would you believe, that I can decide that thing? Yeah. It's so painful.
Well,
So
and
painful.
there's layers and levels in this. That I'm hesitant to open this door, but there's entitlement that comes with that. There's
Sure. Yeah.
societal messages that come with that. There are some real things when I'm working with addicts that we have to unravel, that
Yeah.
we just expect and think that we deserve or we're entitled to, that we have to actually step back and go, no. Just as much as the partner has the right to say yes or no, both partners have the right to say yes or
Right.
no. What are we just expecting the other person to give us that
Yeah.
we just think that we should get, and unraveling some of those messages too. And you use the word boundaries. Boundaries, when I'm teaching consent to kids, as a parent or as an adult, we model boundaries for them. When
Right.
they say no, we stop and we respect their boundary and we show them that we respect other people's boundaries. Like if they say,
Mhm.
I don't want to be tickled right now, we stop tickling. Or even like mom and dad are playing, and then mom and dad says, or say dad says, I'm done. Mom goes, oh, okay, and stops and respects that. Instead of going, no, you're not done. You're still having fun, and push, push, push.
Yeah.
So that those boundaries, we teach that in childhood to model respect for boundaries. And when I have addicts years down the road who were never modeled that themselves, I had never even heard of boundaries until I was in my 20s. Um, Learning not only the importance of boundaries, but learning to respect boundaries.
Mhm.
And I feel like that in of itself sometimes is a big chunk of recovery work.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And it is what I so often try to help recovering addicts understand is, it is a gift. Boundaries are such a gift because when you can embrace them as an invitation to create safety, what that means is, so let's just take this example to make it practical of, don't hug me, don't come hold my hand, don't put your hand on the small of my back, right? Just please don't touch me, right? Uninvited. When you then respect that, and it does then create safety because you're demonstrating your willingness to respect that. Okay, now when you are invited to do that, it's coming with that, what did you call it earlier? Enthusiastic participation.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the person is really doing it because they want to, because, right, not because they feel trapped or forced, you know. And what a gift that is, to know that someone is with me and allowing connection of whatever type, emotional, physical, whatever, because they really want to.
Yes. Yeah. We don't want to be in relationships where the other person is just doing things because they feel obligated.
Right.
And so I love to look at boundaries as somebody is literally giving you a roadmap to them. They're saying,
Yeah.
hey, these are the things that I need for me. And here you go. And if you are able to honor and respect what I need, that's the roadmap to my heart.
Yes.
And I'll just fully validate, they can feel really threatening and scary,
Yeah.
especially after betrayal, where the boundaries sometimes can be more boundaried, more firm
Right.
because we have had an injury. And so there's often a raising up of extra boundaries that maybe weren't there before. It can feel scary and it can feel threatening, but when we can see them as that blueprint, that roadmap, it really is your key to that healthier, closer, connected relationship.
Yeah, totally. Wow. Okay, so starting simple, respecting boundaries. What other tips for learning to do this consent thing can you give folks?
I think the last one I think I'll hit on is just looking at the need for emotional awareness.
Mm.
And recovery work to me, like at its core for both partners, really is rooted in emotional growth and emotional awareness and building up that EQ, that emotional intelligence. And sometimes we get really caught up in the behaviors and the checklists, like in the CSAT model. We really have all of these things that kind of lay out of like task model. If we're going to do this and this and this and this and all these behaviors, if we are not doing that through the lens of emotional awareness, I don't know that those behaviors are going to make a whole lot of difference because at its core, addiction is based in an emotional mismanagement. And
Yeah.
so us really building in this emotional awareness and being able to be in tune with each other's cues.
Mm.
And this really, my EFT, my emotionally focused therapy training comes in of we are constantly giving each other signals and cues, especially in this area. And if
Yes.
we don't learn how to read those cues from each other and don't learn to open our eyes to it, we will miss huge pieces of knowing ourselves, knowing each other, and allowing for that healthiness.
Absolutely. Can we, I want to, if you're okay with it, I want to go on a little bit of a rabbit trail with that. I think it's going to loop back up with this though, but you're articulating something I've been thinking about a lot lately. And it's around that attunement piece. And a lot of betrayed partners, what I hear from them, and I understand why I hear this, they say, he's clueless, right? Like he has no attunement skill. There's no capacity for that. And actually what I find is while there are some folks struggling with addiction, trying to get into recovery who struggle with attunement and do have a maybe an impaired capacity for that, most of them are actually highly attuned. Like they are hypersensitive to their partner's tone of voice and facial expression and all of that. But it doesn't take the next step from attunement to empathy. It's attunement, and then it's immediately processing, what does this data mean about me?
Okay, I love where you're going because that's as you were talking, I was thinking of I'm going to give a hypothetical client.
Yeah.
Hypothetical client is they want to approach their partner and say, hey, I have some time tonight. Kids are at grandma's. Let's spend some time together. The minute they go put their hand on, we'll say with consent, but the minute they put their hand on their spouse's shoulder or partner's shoulder and says, hey, and the partner pulls back, like
Mm.
even just to look at them, but pulls back.
Mm.
I see that hyper attunement, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, she pulled back. Oh, she
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want me. And we either get stories created or we get self protection that kicks in. And so you're right. Like I see that hyper attunement and then I see it either go to a narrative being created or an automatic self protection that goes into then, like you said, making it about them instead of staying attuned and being empathetic to the partner.
Absolutely. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. You just said it better than I did. So here's where I think this ties back in with this topic of consent. It's because if I'm trying to develop, a respect for consent, I want to approach, if I'm the betraying partner and I want to approach my betrayed partner in a way that respects consent, I want to gain this self-awareness of that attunement and notice when that impulse of self-protection or shame or whatever comes up. But instead of going there, push it through and with curiosity go, okay, like with your example, hey, I noticed you kind of pulled away from me a little bit when my hand was on your shoulder. Is everything okay? What was going? Did I startle you? Are you uncomfortable? You know, asking, getting curious instead of immediately going to that story, right? Making space for the partner to say, you just startled me. I'm fine. Or to say, actually, yeah, something felt kind of off inside of me and I don't even know what it is yet, but something. Yeah.
Well, and and I'll say if you're not to this skill level yet, because I love to give the ideal, and then if you're not there yet and you feel that rejection, you pull away, you start creating the stories, and you notice 20 minutes later you're silent and still in your head, it's okay to say, okay, hold on. I
Yeah.
just realized I've been creating the story in my head. Can I tell you what just happened for me and see if I'm anywhere accurate with what happened for you?
Yes.
And so you can get to this place, and usually it's pretty clunky until you get there. But that right there for partners builds so much trust that
Oh,
even if it's later, you coming back to it and saying, this is what happened. This is a story I created in my head. And then get curious.
yeah.
It's great. It's all part of the work.
Totally. Totally. In fact, I another couple that I work with just reported a similar incident. It wasn't 20 minutes later, it was the next morning. So I mean,
Mhm.
they went overnight, but the next morning the guy circled back and said, "Hey, I know something happened when we were in the car yesterday. I know I didn't handle that well. What was going on for you?" And even 12 hours later or whatever it was, 18 hours later, it made a huge difference for her
Yeah.
that he noticed and then was willing to go back and revisit. Yeah.
Huge trust building
Yeah.
and kind of bringing the consent full circle. And I feel like we're barely like touching the tip of the iceberg here. So go learn more after this. But when you are able to incorporate this into your relationship, there are so many good outcomes that come from this because it helps you rebuild the trust. It
Hmm.
helps restore the safety. It
Yes.
helps address these power indifferences that maybe you didn't even recognize were playing. And part of
Hmm.
it, it helps you avoid further harm. It supports both of your healing, your individual healing and your couple healing. It helps you redefine intimacy. And I would say probably one of my favorites is it lays the foundation for healthier patterns because this is really what we want to do is break the unhealthy patterns and start creating new healthier patterns.
Yes. 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 That's the work that affects generations.
Yeah.
That's the work that becomes a legacy. And
Mhm.
I appreciate how you throughout this conversation you keep going back to our kids and what would we want to teach our kids or our grandkids or depending on whatever stage of life we're in. And I think that's a great sort of anchor. Listeners who are wanting, even if you're not wanting, you're just listening and you're knowing you need to begin working on these things. What a great source of motivation to know that you can model something different for the young people in your lives and teach them both by how you treat them and how they see you treat one another. Oh, wow. What a gift. What a
Well, I feel
gift.
like that helps make a meaning out of something that's really hard too. When
Yes.
you're doing this and you can understand it's so much bigger than just you and so much bigger than just you and your spouse or you and your partner, and that there is like it will affect generations to come, that
Yeah.
helps me at least see that this hard work is so worth it and so much bigger than just you.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, so well said. So, I want to put a period right there on the conversation about consent. But before you go, I've been mentioning in the show, but I want you to talk for a minute about the upcoming APSATS conference, because you're a little bit involved in that.
I am involved in it.
Alana's pretty much making it happen, folks. So we'll
I've
talk
had the
about that.
honor of being on the APSATS board, and as such, I get to be the committee head for the conference. And I will tell you, seeing all of these professionals who have so much knowledge and so much wisdom come together and volunteer their time to help you as clients learn and grow and heal, that is really cool. And I'll just say something cool. So we do the first day that's for anybody. So you can come, your partner can come, you can invite your therapist, you can invite people at church, like family that you want them to understand betrayal trauma. Anyone you want, you can invite to that day. And they can do it. It's all online through Zoom. And each hour we have a couple of speakers, but the recordings stay available for, I believe it's 30 days. So even if you can't listen to it in the moment, or you go, man, I wish I really could have listened to so-and-so. Like we have Stephanie Carnes, who's the president of ITAP, which is overseas SATS, and also Michelle Mays, who wrote the book, The Betrayal Bind. Both of them are speaking at the same time.
Oh, what a horrible thing to do to people. Except recordings. Okay.
Exactly. And actually, now that I say that out loud, I think we actually swapped one of them. And so I think they are at separate times. But for that very reason, you get to get it all. And then the second 2 days are just for professionals, for coaches and clinicians. And if you have a therapist, and I get clients all the time who will say, hey, I actually have a therapist, but they're not trained in this. And so they're coming for additional help. But if you have a therapist that you're like, I really like this therapist, I just wish they understood betrayal trauma better, or I wish they understood sexual addiction better, tell them about it, because it's an awesome place where they can come get some foundational training. And then potentially they'll maybe want to do the additional APSATS training from there. But anyway, lots of good information. And I think information is power. And so the more informed you get, the more you are empowered to just make the right choices for you.
Yes. And of course, the links will be in the show notes below to learn more about that. And how about you, Alana? If people just want to learn more about you, connect with you, talk about what you do and how they can get a hold of you.
So I am the owner or co-owner of Choose Recovery Services, and I do therapy, I do coaching, and my main niche is really just trauma, betrayal trauma. I can do the sexual addiction work as well. I do couples work. What I'm really passionate about is the intensives. So we have intensives, and I'll just say my favorites are, we do somatic intensives for betrayed partners who are further along in their healing and who are really just ready to dive in and do the work in their body. That is probably my favorite work, hands down, because we get a lot of really good support in the beginning work. And sometimes we get further along and we get kind of confused on like, what now? And so I would say that's probably one of my passions, is really diving into the body and doing that further work to just move forward.
That sounds awesome. That sounds awesome. And we'll have all the links to get a hold of you in the show notes below as well.
Thank you.
Alana, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service to the APSATS community and to all the betrayed partners out there who are touched through that. I appreciate you very much.
Thanks. All right. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Betrayal Recovery Radio, hosted by Dr. Jake Porter. If you value the content we've shared today, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. For more resources, visit apsats.org. That's APSATS.org.